Chapter 2991. Kevin called to ask what he should do with Rongyu. Lonyu thought for a moment. Send him to my father's place. Drive carefully. Kevin was surprised, but he didn't say anything. Something had happened to Qin Chen at the charity event at the sanatorium today. There were reporters there, but they were suppressed by Mr. Lon. The matter had been settled long ago, but Mr. Lon wanted to send Rongyu to the old CEO's place. He probably wanted to be alone with Qin Chen. Lonyu hung up the phone and looked at his watch. It was already 7 o'clock. Outside the window, it was already dusk, and it looked a little hazy. Lonyu walked to the window and quietly smoked a cigarette before dialing Qin Chen's number. Her phone rang for a long time, but no one answered. He was a little anxious. He kept calling until the third time before she answered. Her voice was a little soft, as if she had just woken up. "Where are you?" His voice was hoarse, and there was an inexplicable emotion in it. It seemed that after she stayed here for a night, the house would feel empty without her. On the other side, Qin Chen sat up with the phone in her hand and scratched her hair. At the hotel. The word hotel touched Lonyu's nerves. His face was very cold. "Qin Chen, you are a married woman. Now you are telling me that you are fooling around in a hotel." Qin Chen rolled her eyes, feeling that it was difficult to communicate with such a man. However, she was in a bad mood today. Her tone was impolite and full of the smell of gunpowder. "Compared to Mr. Lon, who likes to fool around in the sanatorium, isn't it normal for me to fool around in a hotel?" she said coldly and mockingly. "Or has Mr. Lon become an idiot and unreasonable because he has been with a little idiot for too long?" Lonyu was furious. He held the phone in silence for a while. "GM Hotel, right? I'll pick you up." She was stunned for a moment before realizing that he had always known where she was. She was afraid that he would really find her, so she didn't provoke him anymore and said in a low voice, "I'll drive back myself." Lonyu paused. "Your foot is injured. Not as delicate as your sweetheart, little idiot." Qin Chen mocked. For some reason, Lonyu could hear a hint of jealousy in her tone. He didn't explain and only said faintly, "I'll wait for you." Qin Chen chose to hang up the phone before him. As he got up, he threw the phone on the bed. She went to the bathroom to take a shower and tidied herself up. Without putting on any makeup, she put on a pair of sunglasses and went out. She was very tall, and her brown hair was a little wild. She stood out in the crowd. When passing through the lobby, many people recognized Qin Chen. Fortunately, this was a high-class hotel, so there were no crazy fans. But Qin Chen's photo was still taken, and the next day it made the headlines. The headline was, "The Secret Meeting of Supermodels and Wealthy Businessmen, The Great Battle of One Day Why." At this time, Qin Chen sat in the car, fastened his seatbelt, and looked at his phone. It was already 7:30. It took about the same amount of time to get to Lonyu's villa. Qin Chen started the car, and the white Lamborghini sped up instantly. It was convertible again, and his brown hair danced in the night sky. At 8 o'clock sharp, she arrived at his villa on time. She unfastened her seatbelt and got out of the car while watching the movements in the villa. Chapter 2992. Qin Chen puts down her bag and sits opposite him. "Where's Rongyu?" Lonyu looks up at her eyes and says lightly, "He's at my dad's place." Qin Chen is a little annoyed. "Lonyu, you're too much. Too much." Lonyu walks into the dining room first. After waiting for Qin Chen to come in, he pours himself a glass of red wine and continues, "Compared with you fooling around in the hotel, I'll make good arrangements for Rongyu. He's the best husband and father." Qin Chen glares at him. She has the intention to have a cold war with him, because maybe he won't ask her to fulfill her obligations as a couple. But all her perseverance disintegrates after seeing the dishes on the table. She is very hungry. So she doesn't argue with him anymore. She takes the bowl and chopsticks and eats without needing him to tell her. Yu doesn't have a good appetite like her. He smokes a cigarette and says lightly, "Do you think I'm a servant?" After Chen finished eating, he wiped his lips and said, "You cooked so much food, didn't you say it was for me?" "Oh, I remember, there's a little idiot waiting for you to feed in the sanatorium." "Yu, I'm really sorry. If I had known that it was your little idiot, I wouldn't have disturbed her and accidentally hurt her." Yu's eyes are gentle. He knows everything, but Chen doesn't want to explain. She would rather he misunderstand. Moreover, she kept calling him a little idiot just to make him angry. He just smiles gently. "Now that you know, don't provoke her in the future." Chen ignores him and continues to eat. But it seems that when she eats, it doesn't taste as good as before. After all, her mood is not the same. Yu finishes the red wine and starts to eat. When she finishes eating and wants to leave, he says lightly, "Sit down, I have something to tell you." Chen flipped his hair and leaned against the back of the chair, playing with his fingernails. He didn't look very focused. In Yu's eyes, she looked like she was doing official business. She didn't look like a wife, but more like she was taking photos. He was very dissatisfied, so he naturally did not have the mood to eat. He only drank a few mouthfuls before putting it down. The family servant came to tidy up and asked in a low voice, "Sir, are you not going to eat?" It took 2 hours to make, and it was so sumptuous that it would be a pity not to eat it. Yu's gaze fell on Chen's face. He said indifferently, "I'm not eating anymore." "Pour it out." He got up and glanced at Chen. "Let's talk in my study." Chen didn't move from his seat. He didn't care about the presence of the servants and said lazily, "Let's go to the bedroom." "Yu, don't you just want to make love to me? Aren't you tired of making things so complicated?" His face is livid, and the servants at the side don't dare to say anything. In the end, he snorted and went upstairs. He didn't say where he was going, but Chen felt that it was the bedroom. His face of abstinence might be able to deceive others, but to her, it was just a look of lust. And she was afraid that he would mess around in the study. If she couldn't choose to have sex, she would choose to do it on a comfortable and soft bed. At least, it wouldn't hurt that much. Chen followed him into the bedroom and closed the door. She didn't argue and just lay on the bed, kicking off her high heels. "Tell me, what's the matter?" Chapter 2993. He looked at her and said softly, "Come home with me tomorrow. We're going to pick up Yu." Chen nodded absent-mindedly. "Okay." Yu stared at her, and his throat was blocked. They used to have such a beautiful past. That past was casual and full of flesh. He didn't need any reason to want her, but now, he had to spend a long time to sleep with her and make love to her. He even cooked a table full of dishes. He didn't know if he was trying to please her, and he didn't know if it was because of the remaining love or because of today's guilt. He wanted her, but he didn't know what to do. He couldn't release the turbulence in his heart, and finally, he leaned forward and kissed her lips. He felt her resistance, but he pinned her hands firmly on both sides of her body. He said in a low voice, "Don't move, or I'll hurt you." After a few years of being alone, this body wouldn't be satisfied because of a few affairs. It would only become more and more greedy. Even though he warned her like this, Chen still struggled and twisted her body, trying to escape. Yu held her and didn't let her move. He pressed her and kissed her deeply. She thought that she would make love to him calmly, but when his lips touched her, she thought of the way he kissed Lin Cece in front of her in the sanatorium. He was handsome and gentle. Did he do shameless things behind her back? Did he also hug Lin Cece and make love? Qin Chen turned her face to the side and panted softly. I'm not in the mood. Lan Yu paused and looked at her deeply. Are you still bothered by what happened today? No. Qin Chen smiled and turned her face back. She caressed his handsome face with her slender fingers and said gently, anyway, our marriage is only temporary. As long as you don't play a dishonorable role in Rong Yu's life, I won't make things difficult for your little idiot. After we get divorced, it's not impossible for you to marry her, but, she pulled down his head and whispered in his ear, it's probably impossible for you to have 2 wives. If you touch another woman during our marriage, then get out of my bed. Is this an agreement or a threat? Lan Yu propped himself up, and his voice was extremely hoarse. And Mrs. Lan, you're still jealous. Without batting an eyelid, she spat out a few words, I just think it's dirty. Lan Yu was infuriated. Did she think he was dirty? She was really thick-skinned enough to say that. He had been chaste for the past 3 years, but she was married to someone else and had such a big son. He didn't even despise her, but she still had the nerve to say that. He moved slowly away, stared at her for a moment, and then went out. The door was slammed loudly. Qin Chen heaved a sigh of relief, and her body softened. After a while, she looked at the door again. After making sure that the angry man wouldn't come back, she closed her eyes in relief. She ate a little too much, and she was a little sleepy. Models should be on a diet, but she still acted presumptuously today. She was still in a daze, and the man in the study room was still sulking. He smoked one cigarette after another, angry at her and angry at himself. She was his wife. Why couldn't he make love to her? Why couldn't he make love to her? He also wanted to make her cry and watch her cry and beg him. Just thinking about it made his heart flutter. Chapter 2994. Lan Yu thought that he had come back to make love to his wife, and he had thought of many ways to force her. However, he didn't expect that when he returned to the master bedroom, Qin Chen was still awake. She was applying medicine to her feet and her face. Her whole body was immersed in the medicine, so the master bedroom was naturally filled with the smell of medicine. No matter how strong a man's interest was, it would be dispelled. He pursed his thin lips and finally walked in. Qin Chen heard the sound and looked up. She looked at him for a while and then began to apply medicine to her feet clumsily. As Lan Yu watched, he suddenly found it hard to bear. She used to be a top surgeon, but now she couldn't even deal with her own external injuries. He sat next to her and pulled her feet over. Let me do it. Although his voice was very soft, Qin Chen could sense the displeasure in it. She put her feet on his knees and looked up at him. You don't seem happy. Are you still feeling sorry for your little idiot? Lan Yu glanced at her, grunted, and began to apply the medicine for her. His technique wasn't good, but it wasn't bad either. At least, it was much better than hers. However, when he accidentally touched her wound, she frowned and snorted softly. Lan Yu looked at her and didn't say anything. He took the gauze and wrapped it for her. Qin Chen refused. I don't cover this. He didn't stop, but his voice was several degrees colder. Miss Qin, do you think you're walking on a runway now? You're at home now. Qin Chen looked at him and didn't look away. After a long time, she snorted and said, I remember that I'm Mrs. Lan now. As soon as she finished speaking, her chin was held by Lan Yu. He stared at her and said in a tense voice, in your heart, are you Mrs. Lan or Mrs. Rong? Ha! His eyes forced her, leaving no room for her to escape. Qin Chen couldn't avoid it. She stared at him for a long time before she chuckled. In my heart, I'm not anyone's wife. I'm Chin Chin. As she spoke, there was a smile on her face, but there was no smile in her eyes. In Lan Yu's eyes, there was a lack of affection. That's right, fickle. She was heartless to everyone, not only to him, but also to Rong Lei. He tightened his grip on her chin and narrowed his eyes. He said word by word, I really want to kill you. Sorry. Chin Chin smiled faintly. I've made you feel bad, but I have a good suggestion. Divorce me and marry your little idiot. I think you'll be in a much better mood. Lan Yu smiled. After letting go of her, he tidied up the rest of the medicine and said calmly, Mrs. Chin, I'm afraid I have to disappoint you. I spent so much effort to deal with the Rong family. Why do you think I did it? Chin Chen looked down. That's because you're bored. Really? She kicked him lightly with her uninjured foot and leaned back against the headboard. Didn't you spend so much effort just to have sex with me? Seeing that he wanted to refute, Chin Chen smiled mockingly. Do you really have a deep hatred for me? Then kill me. Why did you treat my wound? Why did you please me and cook for me? As his face became more and more gloomy, Chin Chen concluded with a sneer, so men are cheap. Chapter 2995. His face darkened and he walked out abruptly. He came in and made love 7 times a night, but it was all in vain. He left in anger and Chin Chen lay down peacefully. She was really too tired, and her feet were also very painful. She felt even more uncomfortable. Although she didn't care about her husband, it didn't mean that she would be indifferent if he kissed someone else in front of her and was a little idiot. She angrily removed the pills from her face, then picked them up and stuck them on her face. She felt that it was a little ugly and would lower Lan Yu's reputation for being shameless. Just like that, she fell asleep. Lan Yu was extremely annoyed. He walked to the sofa on the first floor and smoked a few cigarettes. He raised his hand to look at his watch and couldn't take it anymore. He called Papa Lan. He couldn't fall asleep, and obviously, Papa Lan couldn't fall asleep either. The old and the young were speechless. After a long time, Papa Lan said slowly, Xiao Rongyu is quite cute, but, if Lan Yu had taken care of Chin Chen at that time, then Xiao Rongyu would have been his eldest grandson. Every time he thought of this, Papa Lan was exasperated and felt that Lan Yu was useless. After sleeping for so long, he didn't even sow a little seed and let someone else beat him to it. Why did the Lan family produce such a useless thing? However, Papa Lan wouldn't tell this to Lan Yu. He only said some encouraging words, it's okay. You and Chin Chen can have a few more. A few more. Lan Yu couldn't help laughing. Chin Chen clearly didn't want him to touch her. How many more did he want to have with her? I don't have that kind of thought. He said to his father calmly and then asked about Xiao Rongyu's situation. After making sure that the little guy was asleep, he said, I'll come over with Chin Chen for dinner tomorrow. Papa Lan sighed and didn't say anything else. Lan Yu hung up and returned to the master bedroom. Chin Chen was asleep, and the bedroom was dark and gloomy. He lay down beside her and no longer had that intention. Closing his eyes, he could smell the shower gel on her body. The smell was the same as his, because she didn't buy anything when she moved in. The scent belonged to him, and she belonged to him. Compared to many years ago, he had the upper hand, but Lan Yu leaned over and gently hugged her. He buried his face in her neck and murmured, Chin Chin, why do I feel like you're still so high up and out of my reach? She could not answer him, she was trapped in the nightmare. Lan Yu's face was pressed against hers, and he only noticed it. He was startled, and then he gently patted her face. But she could not wake up. She cried softly, as weak as a little girl. She began to murmur in a low voice, "Ronglei. No. No." Lan Yu's body froze. She was calling Ronglei. She had forgotten about herself, but she still remembered Ronglei. Lan Yu smiled softly. She was his wife now, but her heart still belonged to Ronglei. Lan Yu let go of her and let her sink into the nightmare. In the darkness, his eyes were filled with pain. She was not the only one in pain. She lost Ronglei, and he lost her heart. He thought, I don't know who is more pitiful than the other. She didn't sleep that night. At dawn, Qin Chen woke up. When she opened her eyes, she saw Lan Yu's enlarged face. She was stunned and remembered what happened yesterday. She wanted to get up, but her head was still a little heavy. Halfway up, she fell back down. At this moment, she heard a mocking voice, "Mrs. Lan." Chapter 2996. Qin Chen looked up at the ceiling and said faintly, "I had a dream." She covered her head, and cold sweat broke out on her forehead. It was a very realistic dream. Lan Yu's gaze was slightly cold. "You don't need to tell me about your dream." After saying that, he lifted the quilt and walked into the bathroom, slamming the door loudly. Qin Chen, on the other hand, was still lying there, holding his head. It was very painful, as if something was about to break out of the cocoon. Her head was splitting. Every time she tried to recall the lost memories, her head would hurt very much. So she didn't think about it later, but the dream last night was so realistic that it affected a part of her memory. It seemed that other than Ronglei, she also remembered something else. Those fragments, that person, the man lying motionless on the bed, who was that man? But in the dream, she wanted to approach, but it was as if she was frozen, and she could never get close. Qin Chen's body was covered in hot sweat. She closed her eyes and curled up her body. This was the reason why she gave up looking for the past, because it was too painful. When Lan Yu came out, Qin Chen had already returned to normal. She said lightly, "There are no clothes for me here, and I don't want to go out wearing your clothes." Lan Yu stood there looking at her for a while, feeling refreshed, and said lightly, "I'll get someone to send it over later." After a pause, he said, "What brand do you like to wear?" Qin Chen mentioned a few brands, and Lan Yu called and ran to get it done. While he was on the phone, Qin Chen went to take a shower. When she came out, Lan Yu had prepared breakfast. Like before, he didn't take care of her because of her harsh words last night, but Qin Chen could feel his coldness. But she didn't care. It was better for him to be cold and indifferent. They ate breakfast in silence, and the managers of several brands came one after another, bringing over the season's new products. There were rows of them, not to mention one season, even 3 years. Qin Chen frowned and looked at Lan Yu. "This is too extravagant." Lan Yu replied naturally, "You used to be much more extravagant than this." Although the brand she signed up for were all top international brands, they weren't considered extravagant. Qin Chen covered his face. "Did I?" Lan Yu looked at her and didn't say anything else. After Qin Chen finished eating, she went upstairs to change her clothes. She wore a simple gray t-shirt and a chiffon long skirt. Her long legs were faintly discernible, which was very attractive. Lan Yu glanced at it and frowned. "Change it." Qin Chen glanced at him. "That's not a big deal." Lan Yu pursed his thin lips and said nothing more. He went outside and got into the car. Qin Chen took his bag and sat in the passenger seat. Lan Yu reached out to wipe the rearview mirror and started the car. When the car drove out of the villa area, the two of them were still silent. Qin Chen still said, "Lan Yu, are you going to keep giving me a Cold War? I remember that we are going to see father. He's not important." Lan Yu's voice was slightly cold, and he had no intention of paying attention to her. Qin Chen had felt his fiery heat before, and now that she was so cold, she didn't feel disappointed. She just felt that he was smart. She did not speak again, and sat quietly. About half an hour later, the car drove into a quiet residential area, where Father Lan lived. Chapter 2997. The black sports car stopped slowly. As soon as Qin Chen opened the door, a little thing flew into her arms. "Mommy." Qin Chen smiled and hugged Xiao Rongyu in his arms and kissed him. "Baby, did you make a fuss last night?" Rongyu looked a little guilty, but he didn't say anything. On the other hand, Mr. Lan smiled and smoothed things over. Fortunately, the little guy wasn't naughty. Although he wasn't his own grandson, Rongyu looked good and smart, so Mr. Lan still liked him very much. Most importantly, he felt that although his son, Lan Yu, said that it was only a temporary marriage, why did he feel that his son was disappointing and wanted to rely on Qin Chen for the rest of his life? In fact, he quite sympathized with Qin Chen. From the beginning to the end, it seemed that his son was pestering other girls, from men to women, and he didn't let go of anything. It was not good for Mr. Lan to intervene in the affairs of the younger generation, so he was only responsible for Rongyu. Qin Chen's son was taken away by Mr. Lan in an instant, saying that he wanted to go to the small park and show off to his old buddies. His proud expression was like a child who got a new toy that others didn't have and couldn't wait to go out and show it off. Qin Chen just smiled and didn't say anything. When Mr. Lan left, he coughed again. "We haven't had lunch yet. Today is Sunday, and the servants are on holiday. Lan Yu, take Qin Chen to the supermarket to buy some things to cook. Remember to cook by yourself, and Qin Chen can just watch. The little girl's hands are very delicate, so don't bully her." After saying that, Mr. Lan took his little cutie for a walk. Sigh, the feeling of having a grandson was really good. He really wanted to have someone else's child, but he had to work hard for his own son. He had given enough opportunities and space for the couple to develop. As for Lan Yu, he didn't have any other skills, but he could cook. He just wanted to see if he could capture Qin Chen's appetite. Mr. Lan chuckled. Little Rongyu's little hand held onto Lan Er's big palm. He was thinking, this grandpa looks as stupid as Lan Er, but he's quite cute. He seems to like me very much. It couldn't be helped. He was so cute that no one seemed to dislike him. What to do? He was going to be a lawyer when he grew up. He didn't want to rely on his looks like a sissy. However, before becoming a lawyer, it was still better to rely on his looks. The adult and the child held hands and went to the park affectionately. Lan Yu's eyes were a little hot as he watched. He hadn't seen his father so happy in a long time. He liked Rongyu very much. At this moment, Qin Chen said calmly, "Don't think about leaving Rongyu here. He is my son, and he needs to receive the most advanced education." Lan Yu glanced at her indifferently. "You think too much." He took the car keys. "Let's go." "Where are we going?" Qin Chen was stunned. Lan Yu had already gotten into the car. "Didn't you hear? There's no one at home to cook, and we don't have any ingredients. We have to go to a supermarket." Qin Chen refused. "I don't want to walk." Lan Yu's eyes were a little deep. "If you don't want to walk, I can use a cart to push you later." Qin Chen stared at him. "Get in the car. It won't be very tiring. Half an hour will be enough." His tone softened. If one listened carefully, it actually sounded like he was coaxing. Qin Chen stood for a while, but still got in the car. Chapter 2998. Qin Chen got in the car in the end. She got in the car and looked at him indifferently. I'm just watching from the side. Lan Yu smiled but didn't say anything. He started the car, looked at the GPS, and chose the nearest supermarket. The car arrived in less than 10 minutes. Lan Yu unbuckled his seatbelt and looked at Qin Chen. Why don't you get out? Qin Chen didn't move and played with his fingernails. I'll wait for you in the car. Lan Yu's eyes were unfathomable. He turned off the engine and got out of the car. Qin Chen was anxious. She unbuckled her seatbelt and got out of the car. Lan Yu, you bastard. Was he trying to kill her by turning off the engine? Lan Yu walked in front. Yeah, I'm a bastard, so I don't have to care about your feelings, do I? Qin Chen was furious, but she couldn't do anything about it. She could only follow behind him. She rarely came to a place like the supermarket, so she didn't expect there to be so many people. There were a lot of people coming and she was pushed to the side. Her feet were still injured, so she was quickly separated. One hand caught her and she was placed in front of him. He put one hand on her waist and said coldly, "You're so stupid. What's the use of being so tall?" Qin Chen was speechless and looked at him. Lan Yu lowered his head and put his chin on her hair so that she couldn't see him. However, this posture was too intimate. Qin Chen wasn't used to it and wanted to break free. You'd better not move. Lan Yu said in a low voice. Don't move. Qin Chen was stunned. She felt something about him that couldn't be ignored. She gritted her teeth and said, Mr. Lan, which girl are you looking at? Lan Yu smiled and said, the girl in front of me. Qin Chen was even more furious, but he couldn't do anything about it. Just like that, he was hugged by him and walked into the supermarket. Since there weren't many people inside, his shameful desire to see her was gone. He let go of her, picked up the shopping cart, and raised his eyebrows. Didn't you say your feet hurt? Come on up. Qin Chen was more than 170 centimeters tall. How could he have the face to stand on it? There's no need, she said faintly. She followed beside him and watched him choose the ingredients. Obviously, Lan Yu was someone who often cooked, so he was very picky. Qin Chen could hardly recognize those green vegetables, but she secretly felt that it was amazing that he could tell them apart. Lan Yu picked at random and asked her softly, Is there anything you want to eat? Anything for me, she said naturally, walking beside him. Lan Yu picked up a box of pork ribs and looked at her. Where's Rongyu? Is there anything he likes to eat? Braised pork ribs and kung pao chicken. He likes them very much. When it came to his son's food, Qin Chen would not disagree with him. After all, he was the one who cooked. Lan Yu looked at her and seemed to be thinking about something. I think it's a little strange that you know what your son likes to eat. Qin Chen, Lan Yu smiled and took the ingredients she said. He bought a big shrimp and said, make a fried shrimp strip. Children like it. Qin Chen looked down. Lan Yu smiled and continued to walk forward. Although it was only a meal, he still personally picked out some nourishing tonics for Papa Lan, filling the car with them. Chapter 29:99. Qin Chen smiled and casually took a bottle of condensed milk and put it in. Lan Yu's lips curled into an almost invisible smile as he continued pushing the cart forward. After a while, he was ready to pay the bill. When he was paying the bill, Lan Yu calmly took a few boxes of tea and put them in the cart. Qin Chen looked at him. Are you using it or your dad? His face darkened. What do you think? My mom is not around, who will my dad use it with? In other words, he wanted to use it with her. Qin Chen didn't say anything and secretly took a look. Large, banana flavored. He really had a heavy taste. Although this was something between husband and wife, Qin Chen was still a little resistant. After all, he was a stranger. She cleared her throat. Put it in the car later, don't mix with them. Lan Yu smiled. His long and narrow eyes had the unique charm of a mature man, but he didn't say anything. When the cashier lady scanned the QR code, Qin Chen turned his face to the side and deliberately didn't look. It was so embarrassing. Lan Yu glanced at her. Then, when it was time to pay, he said calmly, "The money is in the car, Qin, pay." Qin Chen almost exploded. He did it on purpose. But with so many eyes watching, she couldn't search him, so she could only use her phone to pay. After paying, her face was extremely hot. Lan Yu pushed the card out and she didn't want to follow. When they got to the car, he let her get in and put the things in the trunk one by one. After sitting in the car, he asked deliberately, "How much is it?" "I'll pay you back." "No need." Qin Chen was angry. Lan Yu took out his wallet and gave her 2,000 yuan. "Take it." He did it on purpose. He clearly had the wallet on him and he was telling her now. Qin Chen turned her head angrily and ignored him. Lan Yu smiled, kept the money and started the car. When he arrived at Father Lan's villa, Father Lan Xianhua had yet to return. Qin Chen sat on the sofa. "Go and cook. I want to rest for a while. My dad asked you to keep an eye on him." After Lan Yu put down the ingredients, he actually came over and carried her to the kitchen. Qin Chen exclaimed, "Lan Yu, what are you doing?" He placed her on the countertop, his body stuck between hers. She did not dare to move, afraid that his animal instincts would explode. Lan Yu smiled. "Isn't the tea in the car?" "I can't do anything." He let go of her and went to deal with the ingredients. He lowered his head and said softly, "I'm also afraid that if my dad finds out, he'll be traumatized when he eats." Qin Chen snorted softly. "Are you always so shameless?" The knife in his hand slowed down a little, and then he looked up at her. After a long time, he said softly, "Yes, I used to chase after you shamelessly in the past. But in the end, you still chased after someone else." Qin Chen's throat tightened, feeling an indescribable feeling. She shifted a little, her gaze becoming gentler. "Then why are you still chasing after me? Lan Yu, can't you just let nature take its course?" This was the most gentle they had ever been together. Lan Yu's fingers paused for a long time before he said softly, "I guess it's because I can't take it lying down either." With that said, he continued cooking. Chapter 3000. She just watched like that and didn't feel bored. Sometimes, she would say a few words to Lan Yu, and sometimes, she would say a few words to him. As they chatted, she didn't find him annoying anymore. As for Father Lan, he was like a god. When Lan Yu prepared lunch, he finished showing off and came back to eat. When he saw the table full of dishes, he laughed and said, "You're showing off your skills. I don't see you working so hard usually." Lan Yu washed his hands and went upstairs to take a shower. After changing into a set of clothes, he said, "I don't see you talking so much usually." Father Lan laughed and thought about how Lu Wei had been with him for half a year and hadn't seen him bring anyone back for a meal. It was always in the restaurant. After all, Qin Chen was different in his heart. Papa Lan chuckled as he thought of this. Xiao Rongyu was very satisfied with Lan Er's cooking. His small eyes rolled and he felt that it was not a loss for his mommy to find this man. It would be best if she could bring him, a burden, over. Everyone was happy during the meal, especially Qin Chen who ate a lot. She thought that if she ate like this every day, she probably wouldn't have to be a model anymore. Which supermodel would wear a circle of fat on the runway? So after the meal, even though her feet hurt, she still endured the pain and went for a walk to digest her food. Xiao Rongyu ate a little more and lay down to take a comfortable nap with her little belly propped up. Father Lan watched over her lovingly. Lan Yu was really busy with work, so he used a wireless laptop to work at home. When Qin Chen came back, he was still focused on the screen. Qin Chen didn't want to spend time with him, so he wanted to run away but was stopped by Lan Yu. "Help me make a cup of tea." Qin Chen blinked. Lan Yu looked at her. "Is there a problem?" She shook her head and went to the kitchen. It wasn't easy for her to find tea leaves and help him make it. He seemed to be very thirsty. He didn't care about the heat and took a sip. Qin Chen looked at him and said, "If there's nothing else, I'm going to rest." Lan Yu looked at her and said slowly, "Rong Yu is with my father. You can sleep in my room, the one on the east side of the second floor." Qin Chen didn't say anything and went upstairs. Upstairs, she pushed the door open. His bedroom was a male bedroom. It was mainly gray, and it looked like he stayed there occasionally because there was a set of clothes from early summer on the bed. It should have been left behind by Lan Yu. She took the clothes to the sofa and lay down. There was also a masculine scent at the tip of his nose, as well as the scent of shower gel. It was the same scent that Lan Yu had in the villa. This smell made her feel somewhat at ease, and she unconsciously fell asleep. When he woke up, the pure masculine aura was even stronger. She opened her eyes and looked at the man on top of her. Lan Yu was kissing her. Qin Chen murmured, "Are you done with your work?" Because of the lack of sleep, her mind was still a little unclear, so it was particularly soft. Lan Yu nodded and kissed her lips absent-mindedly. "We did it once." He was originally angry with her, but today was a little too beautiful. So when he went back to the room to get a document, he saw her lying in his bedroom unguarded, and all his desires were aroused. Qin Chen was a little uncomfortable being kissed by him, but she still didn't forget to refuse him. "Well, weren't we in the car?" He kissed her for a moment and smiled. "I brought it here." Saying that, he put one hand on her hand and whispered, "Put it on for me." Chapter 3001. Qin Chen turned her face to the side, which was a little red and hot. She said in a low voice, "Is this the only hobby you have left? If I don't do anything when my wife is lying on my bed, then I'm pretty much useless." Lan Yu's voice was low, and if one listened carefully, they could even hear a chuckle in it. Qin Chen was very angry, but she was being touched by him like that. She wasn't cold, so she naturally felt it. After a while, he came deep and shallow, and she could be considered to be cooperative. Because there was no coercion, this time it was especially touching. Lan Yu's face was slightly twisted, and he held her face with both hands and kissed her lightly. As he kissed, he said in a low voice, "You also miss me, don't you?" Although they had done it before, it seemed that this was the first time they had reunited. Water and dew blended. Just when the two of them were in love, Lan Yu unilaterally thought, his phone rang. Lan Yu didn't care and continued to do it regardless. Qin Chen was obviously distracted, and she turned her head to look at his phone. Her voice was a little intermittent, "Lan Yu, your phone." Lan Yu pressed her down and said warmly, "Pick it up after we're done." With that said, he continued, the phone also continued to ring, one after another. He wanted to take the phone and turn it off, but when he saw that it was Lin Cece, he picked it up and said in a slightly breathless voice, "Cece, what's the matter?" Qin Chen was originally nervous, but when she heard him call Cece, she was in no mood at all. She turned her head and closed her eyes slightly. However, Lan Yu didn't stop, and he continued to talk to Lin Cece. On the other side, Lin Cece cried softly, Lan Yu, I've caused trouble. Lan Yu closed his eyes slightly and enjoyed it. After a while, he asked in a hoarse voice, what's wrong? Lin Cece cried even more fiercely, but her voice was a lot lower, Lan Yu. I accidentally burned down the nursing home. Lan Yu had finally tasted the feeling of 1,000 miles of venting. After a while, he kissed Qin Chen and said gently, I'll go take a look. Cece burned down the sanatorium. She's scared now. Qin Chen lay still. After a long time, she said softly, is there no one else in the sanatorium? Lan Yu, are you going to rush over every time? He paused for a moment before forcing a smile. Qin Chen, I actually don't need to explain to you, but I still want to tell you that I don't have any thoughts about Cece. I hope you do, Qin Chen said coldly and sat up. Lan Yu did not move aside. Qin Chen frowned. Move your little bean teeth away. The author laughed unkindly. Lan Yu's face darkened as he gritted his teeth. Little bean sprout. Qin Chen, can you say that again? Isn't it? Qin Chen sneered. Lan Yu's face darkened as he stared at her. You'll suffer next time. Qin Chen snorted. You'd better go and comfort your little idiot. His face darkened even more. He got up and pulled up his trousers. After tidying himself up, he looked at Qin Chen. She did not say anything. She also sat up slightly at the head of the bed. Her face was a little red. It was brought about by love. He didn't know why, but he felt a little guilty looking at her. This was probably the bad habit of all men. He said in a low voice, wait for me to come back. Qin Chen looked at him without saying anything. Lan Yu pursed his thin lips and finally left. Chapter 3002. He turned his head and looked into her eyes. Qin Chen snorted softly, looking fierce. Lan Yu smiled, picked up the pillow in a good mood, and put it back. She still ignored him. He paused. Qin Chen, you're like a child who can't get candy. She glared at him. Lan Yu chuckled. This time, he really left. You pig who can't control yourself. Qin Chen snorted. She wasn't in the mood to lie down anymore, so she went to the bathroom to take a shower. Her feet still hurt, but she endured the pain, took a shower, and changed her clothes. Lan Yu didn't leave immediately. Instead, he went to explain to his father. Father Lan obviously didn't agree. He loved Lin Cece, but now that his son had finally brought Qin Chen back, he abandoned Qin Chen for Lin Cece. Did he still want to get a wife? Lan Yu smiled faintly. Dad, I can't leave Cece alone. Is there no one else besides you? Father Lan was unhappy. Think about Qin Chen's feelings. His words made Lan Yu silent. After a long time, he said in a low voice, Dad, I'm already very concerned about her feelings. He paused for a moment before continuing, I didn't marry her to love her. Father Lan was furious and snorted. You're getting more and more duplicitous. Fine, go. When you regret it, don't come to me and cry. He despised his son. Previously, he hadn't seen Lu Wei's parents for a long time, but now he was bashful. In his opinion, Lin Cece was important, but Lan Yu's departure was obviously to make things difficult for Qin Chen or himself. He said he hated him, but at the same time, he was afraid that he would care too much. Lan Yu took the car key and left. Father Lan sighed. At this time, Rong Yu, who had been pretending to be asleep, opened his eyes. His little face was adorable, and his eyes were wide open as he looked at Father Lan. Father Lan's heart was about to melt. No matter whose seat it was, this was his great-grandson. Xiao Rong blinked her adorable eyes and looked at Papa Lan. Is Uncle Lan going to cheat on me? Father Lan's old face stiffened, and he scolded his son in his heart. How was he going to explain this to the little cutie now? Could she say that her son had been taking care of Lin Cece? Although it was a pure relationship, if a man and a woman said that there was no warmth between them, who would believe it? Even he didn't believe that his son, who had been a monk for so many years, wouldn't be moved by Lin Cece's pretty face. Even if it was an opportunity, he would at least take advantage of it. Therefore, Papa Lan did not have the confidence to explain to Rong Yu. Finally, he coughed lightly and said, "It's hard to say. You can ask your mother." As a mother, she would never let her son know these little secrets, so Papa Lan was confident. Father Lan cheered for himself and applauded for himself. He had pushed the blame so beautifully. However, he never expected that Xiao Rongyu would ask Qin Chen in the afternoon. Qin Chen drank a mouthful of juice and glanced at Father Lan. Father Lan's eyes were filled with certainty. Under Lan Yu's determined gaze, Qin Chen slowly said, "Rongyu, Uncle Lan and Lin Cece have always been together. Your mother is the mistress." Father Lan was stunned by this answer and was momentarily at a loss for words. Xiao Rongyu asked anxiously, "Mom, what do you mean by mistress?" Chapter 3003. Xiao Rongyu nodded, indicating that he was relieved. Then he raised his little face. Then should Mom find a mistress to piss Uncle Lan off? Qin Chen looked surprised. There's no need for that. Her son carefully observed her expression and then said softly, "But I think Mom is angry at Uncle Lan." Was Mom really forced to be a mistress? Qin Chen glared at his son. Father Lan was satisfied. Son Zhao was really smart. Qin Chen glanced over again and Father Lan shut up. He had to keep a low profile. After all, it was his son's fault for finding another girl. Lan Yu was stunned when he arrived at the sanatorium. The place that had been fine was now pitch black. The fire engine was still there to deal with the aftermath and the director and doctors were standing on the lawn outside. Lin Cece, who had caused the trouble, was also standing there. Her little face was as dark as a black egg and only her eyes were moving. When she saw Lan Yu coming over, she pounced over like a little animal looking at its mother. She almost called him Mom. Lan Yu's face was a bit dark. He frowned and looked down at her. "Were you scolded?" Although he wanted to scold her, he couldn't bear to see her pitiful look. He reached out and touched her little head. Lin Cece whimpered and pounced in his arms. The director came over and said that it was also a headache. Cece was simply a devil in human form. Wherever she went, she caused trouble. In the past 3 years, the hospital had been flooded twice and burned 3 times. Fortunately, there were no casualties. It was really a headache. Fortunately, they had President Lan's sponsorship. Otherwise, no sanatorium could afford to take care of Lin Cece. The director sighed. "I can't stay here for a few months again. Fortunately, there haven't been many patients these years." He looked at Lan Yu. "Can you let President Lan take care of Cece for a while? You see, we really can't do anything about it." He was afraid that Lan Yu would be unhappy and not give the money, so he pulled himself together. "Well, let's fix the house and bring Cece back. What do you think, President Lan?" He looked at Lan Yu longingly. "Just a few months, let them live comfortably for a few months, right?" Lan Yu felt helpless. Looking at the little fellow in his arms, he felt both angry and amused, and even a little heartache. An unwanted child. He thought for a moment and said, "I'll pick him up." Hurry up here. The dean wiped his sweat and smiled. Of course, we will do it as soon as possible. He would definitely drag it out as soon as possible. It would be best if the 2-month construction period could be extended to half a year. The dean thanked the fire for sending little troublemaker away. Next, he could really drink tea. Dream on. Lan Yu looked over and said calmly, I'm married, so it'll be 2 months at most. The dean was stunned. Are they married? He hurriedly said, then let us take care of Cece. President Lan, you're married. How inconvenient is this? If Cece ran over and caused President Lan to divorce, then their sanatorium would probably be finished. Therefore, the dean tried his best to invite Cece to stay. How about changing my office into Cece's ward? I'll take care of her myself. What do you think, President Lan? Lan Yu looked at Lin Cece. Cece, are you willing to do that? Lin Cece bit her lip. She thought of the pigeons in the square, so she whispered, I want to move out. Lan Yu thought for a moment and agreed. Well, come to my place for 2 months. He knew in his heart that it wasn't that there was no place for him to stay. He just wanted to see Qin Chin. Chapter 3004. When Lan Yu returned to the villa with Lin Cece, he remembered that Qin Chen and Rong Yu were still at his father's house. Lin Cece sat on the sofa and watched TV. He took out his phone and called Qin Chen, are they still at my father's place? Qin Chen said in a low voice, Rong Yu is asleep. I'll bring him back in a while. I'll pick you up. Lan Yu's voice was calm. Qin Chen refused, I'll drive back myself. You have 2 cars here. Lan Yu frowned, but he didn't say anything after looking at Lin Cece. He didn't feel at ease leaving her at home. At this time, it was already evening, and the sky was about to turn dark. Lan Yu stuffed a bag of snacks to Lin Cece and let her eat them while he went to the kitchen to cook. While cooking, he thought that Qin Chen didn't know when she would come back, so he planned to call her after cooking and tell her that Cece was here. She was probably angry, but he wanted to explain it to her, and she should listen. Lan Yu thought and smiled faintly. He touched his forehead. He shouldn't have compromised like this. He was thinking about how to torture her, but it seemed that he could only be angry with her, but he couldn't hate her. At about 7 o'clock, he had finished cooking. When he was about to serve the dishes, Lin Cece ran over and hugged his waist from behind. Lan Yu, are you ready? She patted her stomach. I'm hungry. Lan Yu smiled and kissed her head. I'll be ready in a while. Lin Cece looked up at him and smiled foolishly. In her heart, Lan Yu was like her mother, and she liked him very much. Naturally, she kissed Lan Yu on the cheek. It wasn't a big deal when they were together in the past, but it wasn't the case in Qin Chen's eyes. She knew that Lan Yu didn't marry her because of love. She didn't expect him to be the same as her, but it didn't mean that she could stand her husband kissing another woman in front of her. It was in the villa where they lived. Qin Chen stood quietly. Rong Yu looked at them and then held his mother's hand, sighing, Mom, you're right. You're not a mistress. Qin Chen smiled and looked at Rong Yu. Mom will take you back to Grandma's house, okay? Rong Yu said yes. Although he was very hungry and liked Uncle Lan's cooking, he didn't want to see his mother sad. Although his mother didn't admit it, he could see that she was unhappy. Qin Chen lowered his head and smiled, then looked at the man and woman. At this time, Lan Yu looked at them. They looked at each other. Lin Cece was still hugging Lan Yu's waist. When she saw Qin Chen, she was surprised and scared. She curled up in Lan Yu's arms and whispered, Is she angry? Lan Yu didn't push her away and said indifferently, Maybe. Lin Cece bit her lip and asked in an even lower voice, "Am I disturbing you?" "I'll talk to her." Lan Yu patted her head to comfort her. Finally, he let go of her and walked to Qin Chin. Qin Chin didn't leave immediately. Instead, he said softly, "I don't want to quarrel with Mr. Lan in front of Rong Yu." Lan Yu frowned. "I said that I don't have that kind of feeling for Cece." Chapter 3005. After Qin Chin said that, she looked at Lin Cece and then back at Lan Yu's face. "There's really no need for you to bring her back for me to see, and I won't tolerate it. That's it." After saying that, Qin Chin carried his son out, got into his car and started it. She walked away cleanly, without any reluctance to leave. Lan Yu stood there and didn't say anything. He just watched them leave, looked at Xiao Rong's disappointed eyes, and looked at the back of the car. Finally, he calmed down. Lin Cece bit her lips and walked over. Did I make her unhappy? In her world, she couldn't tell the difference between family and love. But she vaguely felt that it was her appearance that made her beautiful sister unhappy. Lin Cece bit her lips and gathered her courage to say what was in her heart. "Can I stay at Guzai's place?" Guzai. Lan Yu was a little stunned. Guzai and Lin Cece had only met a few times, but Cece actually remembered Guzai and wanted to stay at Guzai's house. He looked at Lin Cece carefully and asked, "Why?" Lin Cece's heart beat faster and she blinked innocently. "Because he will help me catch pigeons and he will cook delicious food." Lan Yu was relieved. But he still didn't agree because he didn't dare to take the risk. Because he felt sorry for Cece. She was as innocent as a piece of paper now. If she had feelings for Guzai and Guzai's family didn't agree or Guzai didn't think it through, Cece would be hurt. But while he was worried about her, he also hated himself. She was obviously very innocent, but he still used her. He used her to test Qin Chin and see if Qin Chin would be angry. But in the end, Qin Chin left, and the person who was angry seemed to be him. Besides being angry, he was also worried. Lan Yu pursed his lips and let out a long breath. "Let's eat, we'll talk later." Lin Cece was a little disappointed that he didn't agree, but she didn't dare to mention it again. Now, Lan Yu's role was to be the head of the family. If Lan Yu said that she couldn't do something, she wouldn't dare to do it. She was also afraid that Lan Yu would be angry. During the meal, she kept asking Qin Chin when she would be back. Lan Yu ate and paused for a moment, then said indifferently, "She won't be back for the time being." Lin Cece was quite sensitive. She asked, "Does that mean she won't come back if I'm here?" Lan Yu didn't want to talk to her about this, but she kept asking, so he answered directly, "Yes." The little fool was not stupid at all. He added, then, I'll go back to the sanatorium. But I don't want to go back. I don't want the director to take care of me. He's too old. Lan Yu did not know whether to laugh or cry. Her thoughts were transparent to him. He thought for a moment and said, "Let's talk about it in a few days." Cece was like a child. In fact, it was really nothing. If Qin Chen could understand, Cece could be their child, just like little Rong Yu. Lin Cece looked at him secretly. She was sure that he would be unhappy if she mentioned it again, so she didn't dare to say anything. At night, when she was sleeping, Lan Yu came to see her and left. Lin Cece took out a pigeon toy from under her pillow, and hugged it to sleep. She talked softly when she was sleeping. "Although you are very poor, I still like to be with you." In the other master bedroom, Lan Yu stood in front of the window and smoked. He didn't know that his little fool had also started to fall in love. Chapter 3006. Lon Yu smoked as he looked at his phone. He knew that Chin Chin would be angry, but he still brought Lin Cece back. For the first time, he knew that not only women could be angry, but men could also be angry. Outside, it suddenly rained. It was a thunderstorm. Lightning flashed across the horizon, tearing through half of the sky. Lon Yu raised his hand to look at his watch, wondering if Chin Chin had arrived home. He was still worried, so he called her. The phone rang a few times, but she didn't answer. He called again, but this time, her phone was turned off. He knew that she had probably gone home, but she just didn't want to answer his call. Actually, he didn't want to hear her voice that much, but he was worried. Lon Yu pursed his lips and looked at his phone. In the end, he didn't call her again. On the other side, Lin Cece also took out her phone and carefully called Gu Zhe. He had called her last time, but she hadn't called him even once. Although she was a little silly now, she still had the demeanor of a woman and smiled. She dialed Gu Zhe's number, and Gu Zhe picked up very quickly. At this moment, Gu Zhe had just come out of the bathroom. He was only wearing a bathrobe, and there were still drops of water dripping from his chest. His well-built body was very attractive. He wiped his wet hair with one hand and held his phone with the other. His voice was a little deep. "I'm Gu Zhe." The little fool on the other side of the phone was stunned. His voice was really nice. And was it really Gu Zhe's voice? Why did he have such a nice voice? It sounded so nice, just like the voice on the radio. Overbearing CEO. It wasn't easy for the little fool to think of this word. She suddenly became bashful. "It's thundering and it's raining. Have you collected the clothes?" Gu Zhe was drinking a mouthful of water and suddenly burst out. Collected clothes. What was she saying? But soon, he realized that it was the little fool who called him. The little fool. He hadn't seen her for a long time. Gu Zhe was stunned, and the little fool on the other side of the phone was about to cry. When he didn't speak, she thought he was angry and didn't want to talk to her. Thus, the little fool hung up the phone in disappointment. On the other side, Gu Zhe looked at his phone, a little puzzled. What's wrong with the little fool? Out of worry, he called back. The phone rang, but the little fool was still crying. Even when he heard the phone ring, he didn't want to answer. She bit her lip and hugged herself. The little fool was angry at herself. Why did she call him? Maybe he hated her to death. And maybe he was currently hugging a female seductress and nibbling on her. He didn't like her at all. The silly girl cried while Gu Zhe kept on making phone calls. Finally, she picked up and said in a sobbing voice, "Please don't pester me anymore." Gu Zhe laughed and patiently coaxed the little fool. "How did I pester you?" The silly girl bit her lip. "You've called me so many times. If you're not pestering me, then what are you?" "Oh, then why did you call me first? Does that count as pestering me?" Gu Zhe followed her words and asked. Lin Cece snorted softly. "It doesn't count if I called you." For a moment, Gu Zhe didn't know what to say. She didn't play by the rules and was so unreasonable. He should hang up the phone, but his heart was soft and he wanted to see her. Because he could tell that she had been crying. Chapter 3007. Lin Cece froze for a moment. After a long time, the little fool's eyes turned pink. She bit her lips, feeling an indescribable joy. However, the little fool didn't agree to it easily. Instead, she smiled and said, "Are you pestering me?" Gu Zhe smiled and casually threw the towel to the side. "Yes, I'm pestering you." Perhaps he was a little lonely and wanted someone to accompany him. At that moment, the little fool called him. He thought that he would be like Lan Yu and take care of her like a little sister. Guze found a very ideal reason for himself, and then said with some joy, "I'll pick you up." The little fool was in a difficult position. She didn't want him to know that she was staying at Lan Yu's house, so she said softly, "I'm outside." Guze's face darkened. "Where are you?" "I'll come over immediately." "Don't move. It's best if you find a shop by the road and stand there." The little fool looked around. It was all luxurious decorations in Lan Yu's villa. She said secretly, "Shall we meet at the square?" Guze's tone became stern. "Do you know the way?" "Yes, I do." The little fool smiled. How would she know? But she had money and knew how to hail a taxi. However, she didn't think about it. It was very dark outside and it was raining heavily. She couldn't hail a taxi. She talked to Guze as she walked out of Lan Yu's villa. The thunder rumbled but the rain stopped. The little fool ran out just like that. She only had her phone. Lan Yu didn't know anything. But in such a villa area, how could the little fool walk out? Guze drove to the square and called her number. "Cece, where are you?" Lin Cece looked at the trees around her and was about to cry. "I don't know." Guze closed his eyes and scolded the little fool in his heart. However, he still told her patiently, "Do you have WeChat on your phone? If you do, we can add it and share our location." Lin Cece wanted to say no, but she was afraid that he would scold her, so she carefully said yes. But she hung up and closed her eyes. She didn't know what was wrong with her. She seemed to have learned it. It was as if these things were engraved in her blood and bones. She calmly downloaded WeChat, pulled out her contacts and added Guze. Then, she shared her location. Guze received it within a minute. He looked at the phone in surprise. Is Lin Cece better? Otherwise, how could he be so fast? She clearly didn't know anything. He didn't have time to think about it and drove there first. About half an hour later, he found her near Lan Yu's house. Guze was not a fool. He immediately understood. He carried the little fool into the car and glared at her fiercely. "Are you staying at Lan Yu's house?" He asked fiercely, but he couldn't help but pinch her little face. The little fool looked at him as pitiful as a puppy. After a while, she cried. "You were the one who said you wanted to eat skewers. You were the one who pestered me to come out. I didn't want to come out at first." She cried so loudly that Guze couldn't do anything about it. He could only stare at her little face and give her a tissue impatiently. The little fool cried as she said, "My feet hurt from walking. Do you still have skewers?" Lan Yu's expression didn't look too good. "No." He started the car. As the car drove, the little fool beside him kept crying. She should have felt annoyed by crying like that, but Guze didn't feel it at all. Chapter 3008. He cleared his throat and said calmly, "What are you crying for? If you cry again, I'll eat you up." "Really?" The little fool suddenly moved his face closer, sticking it to the side of his face. "Where are you going to eat?" The black sports car braked suddenly. The car came to a halt. Guze turned his head over slowly and looked at the fool. The fool didn't seem to notice and was still smiling. She even leaned over and said, "Come and eat, I've just eaten something delicious and fragrant. I'm willing to share it with you." Guze stared at her mouth. It was indeed tempting. His gaze deepened, and his body leaned slightly towards her. Initially, she was going to let him eat, but when his burning manly scent came closer, she leaned back immediately. Her head hit the back of the seat and it hurt so much that she started tearing up. However, she didn't dare to cry out loud and could only look at him in a daze, crying worthless tears. Guzé leaned forward again and said in a low voice, "Are you scared? Didn't you want me to eat you up just now? Where should we eat? Tell me, where do you agree to eat?" She was scared and her tears seemed to have stopped as she looked at him blankly. After a while, she said, "Let's just eat." Her eyes were also fixed on his beautiful thin lips, his straight nose, and his long and narrow phoenix eyes. He was really good looking. Really good looking, and it would definitely taste good. The little fool happily thought about it and stammered, "Anywhere, anywhere is fine." Right after she said that, he knocked her on the head and snorted coldly. "What are you thinking about?" Guzé sat up straight and looked at her, saying indifferently, "Don't say such things to men casually in the future." "I'm not saying it casually, I'm saying it seriously." Lin Cece pouted and looked at him. In her heart, she was still wondering if he would eat her up if she cried a little. However, he was so fierce and she didn't dare to. She had to find an opportunity to cry. The fool's words made Guzé furious. However, he thought about it and didn't want to be calculative with a fool. Thus, he restarted the car. "Let's go eat skewers." The little fool made an "oh" sound and didn't say anything else. But in her heart, she was thinking, if I get drunk, can I stay at his house? After making up her mind, the little fool revealed a sweet smile. Guzé drove into the city. When the little fool got out of the car, she suddenly looked at the black sports car and then at Guzé. She whispered, "Your car is very expensive, right? I borrowed it." Guzé smiled faintly. "It's lawn use." The little fool heaved a sigh of relief. "As long as it's not borrowed from a woman, it's fine." The meaning of her words made Guzé's face darken. She was very straightforward, calling him a gigolo. Guzé snorted coldly. He almost didn't want to take her to eat skewers. Perhaps sensing his intentions, the little fool immediately hugged his arm tightly. I was wrong. She was so innocent, but Guzé's thoughts were not so simple. She must not know how soft her body was and how impulsive it would be for a man to hug her like that. He was also a man who hadn't had a woman for a long time. Guzé was surprised to find himself in a sorry state. He was not Lu Xiaohui. It was just that he hadn't been aroused by a woman for a long time. Chapter 3009. He hadn't been aroused by a woman for a long time, but now that she was hugging him, he felt something. Guzé had a strange feeling in his heart, and so did his body. He struggled a little, but the little fool hugged him even tighter. She was afraid that he would leave her behind, or not bring her to eat skewers. Guzé was helpless. He was also afraid that others would see something wrong with him, so he took off his jacket and put it in front of him so that he wouldn't be discovered. But the little fool didn't know anything. Not only was she curious, she even reached over and asked curiously, "Did you bring a gun?" Guzé almost couldn't control himself. He glared at her, "Don't touch me, or I'll shoot you." The little fool was frightened again, and she retracted her hand. It was a gun, and it was very hard. She looked at him, "Will you kill me?" Guzé was amused. He held her hand as they walked and explained, "Yes, so you have to be obedient. Otherwise, if I shoot you, you'll die. No, it'll be a fate worse than death. Like a roasted pigeon, plucking its feathers before eating it." The little fool felt that it was delicious just thinking about it, and she swallowed her saliva. Guzé held his forehead and smiled helplessly. She really didn't know anything. But she didn't know that he could say such shameless things to her, and that was actually bullying her. Wasn't the little fool easy to bully? He wasn't a good person, and he came out to make her happy. He came out because he wanted to find happiness. So he didn't explain, and just stroked her hair. This kind of kissing action made the little fool happy, and she immediately hugged his waist, burying her little face in his chest, and said sweetly, "Then I'll pluck your feathers and eat you." Pluck and eat him. Guzet looked down at a certain part of his body, and he felt a sense of malice rising behind him. But the little fool was so happy, and she pulled him everywhere. In the end, Guzet chose a skewer shop, and it was very famous. He was dressed in expensive clothes, and he looked out of place in the shop. Not only others, but even the little fool could see that. She reached out and tugged at his sleeve. "Don't tell me you borrowed these clothes as well." Guzet found it funny and said seriously, "I've already borrowed the house. Do you want to go take a look tonight?" "Yes." She smiled, which was exactly what he wanted. As for Guzet, he was momentarily speechless. Then, he said softly, "I'll send you to Lanyu." Then, the little fool lied. Without changing his expression, he said, "Big sister is in the villa, and she has a cute baby. I don't want to live there." Guzet raised his eyebrows. "Chin Chen lives at his place. Then why did Lanyu let Lin Cece stay there? Was he courting death? Or do you think life is too boring?" Lin Cece looked at Guzet's expression in a low voice. She was afraid that he would not take her in, so she tugged at him again. "I don't want to live there. Can you tell Lanyu that you lack a servant at home?" Guzet coughed lightly, and asked seriously, "What do you know?" "Yes." She thought about it carefully, and then said honestly, "I know how to eat, sleep, and play games. I'm good at it, and I can always clear the game in one go." Guzet did not find it strange. Lin Cece was a computer expert in the past, and she might not have forgotten that subconsciously. Just like in the past, she would be able to locate him very quickly. She was actually not that stupid. Chapter 30:10. Guzet smiled. "You know a lot of things, but I might not have the money to hire you. What do you think I should do?" The fool was stunned. "Is there really no way at all?" She bit her lips and asked him seriously. "You can borrow some from Lanyu. Just a little will do." Guzet held back his laughter. "But I still don't have the money." The fool was about to cry as she pouted. "Why are you so poor? It's not wrong to be poor." Guzet couldn't help but laugh as he pinched her cheeks. "Silly girl." The fool was angry as she lowered her head and sulked. She felt that she couldn't back down. At least there was a little bit of pay. Besides, he wasn't that poor. However, Guzet wasn't going to back down at all. There was no use getting angry. She really didn't want to go, but she felt that it was a good opportunity for them to eat skewers together. Lin Cece looked up and gave in. "Then I don't want the pay." No, I mean, you owe me." Guzet called out to the boss and had him send over a portion of the specialty skewers. The little fool immediately forgot about being a nanny and ate with gusto. "It's really delicious." She ate it sweetly, her eyes curved into crescents as she smiled. Guzet sat opposite her. Looking at the purity in her eyes, his heart softened. He reached out and rubbed her eyelids. The fool smiled and didn't think much of it. She continued to eat. At that moment, Guzet's manly charm couldn't compare to the skewers in his hands. Guzet didn't really like these things, so he only ate a few mouthfuls. He didn't drink as he had to drive her back later. He had never thought of bringing this troublemaker home. However, the fool drank quite a bit. Guzé thought that he would get her drunk and send her to Lan Yu so that Lan Yu could have a headache. However, he did not expect that Lin Cece's alcohol tolerance was so bad. At first, she was sleeping, then she started dancing in the car. She even took off her jacket and underwear. Guzé kept his hands on the steering wheel and tried not to look at the little fool in the back seat. At this moment, she was only wearing a singlet, and it couldn't be taken off. Her fair arms were particularly attractive in the dim light. In the eyes of a man like Guzé who had been abstinent for a long time, it was like a wolf seeing a piece of meat. It was hard to control. He cleared his throat, but his voice was still hoarse. Cece, put on your clothes. Not only did the silly girl not listen to him, she even moved closer to him and asked softly, "Did I dance well?" She climbed to the front seat with her slender legs and even wanted to climb on top of him. The supercar came to a sudden stop. It was especially ear-piercing on the streets in the middle of the night. Fortunately, it was late at night and after the rain, so there were not many people on the streets. Guzé looked at the little fool in front of him, but at this moment, he felt that she was more like a demon. His face was a little dark. "Do you do this with Lan Yu at home?" The little fool shook her head blankly and then said something that infuriated him. "I don't know. Don't know. Does that mean that there might be?" At this moment, the little fool stared at his lips as though she had been salivating for a long time. She stared at him and then bit him. Only the heavens knew that Guzé had thought that she was kissing him. Although she might not be good at kissing, she wasn't biting him. Chapter 30:11. Guzé narrowed his eyes and stared at the little wild cat. "Why did you bite me?" He didn't know why his voice was so hoarse. It was tainted with a desire that shouldn't be there. The little fool lay helplessly in his arms. He was wearing a black shirt of good quality. It was cold and very comfortable. That little fool rubbed herself against his body with all her might, which also made Guzé angry that he shouldn't have. His voice was extremely low as he said, "Don't move anymore." "I'm moving." The little fellow didn't stop. Instead, she desperately rubbed herself against him. Guzé's expression changed greatly, and a thin layer of sweat appeared on his forehead. He pressed his hands on her waist, trying to stop her. She had no idea what she was doing to him at this moment. They were making love through their clothes. He clearly wanted to stop her, but his hands seemed to have magic. They kept pressing her back and forth. He was enjoying it while feeling guilty. He felt that it was no different from rape. When these two words appeared in Yuang's mind, everything came to a halt. There was only the sound of decadent breathing and his guilt. He thought, if she wasn't a little fool and was extremely smart, would he still touch her? He wouldn't. He would keep his distance from her. In other words, psychologically, he was no different from those men. He would also bully her. Guzé suddenly leaned against the back of the chair, gasping for breath. Lin Cece helplessly lay in his arms, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what was wrong with him. They were fine just now. She tried to kiss him again. Her soft little body lay in his arms, and her little lips gently touched his neck, bit by bit, as if she was self-taught. Guzé turned his face away and didn't let her touch him. She was a little hurt, but she stubbornly kissed him again. "Cece." He finally stopped her. He held her little arm and pulled her body over. "We can't do this." She looked hurt. "Why? You were like this just now." Guzé didn't know how to explain to her, but he had to tell her no matter how difficult it was. He stopped the car by the roadside and carried her to the back seat. He held her like a child and helped her put on her clothes. Lin Cece didn't move. She just stared at him blankly. You haven't said why. Guze put on her clothes and sighed. Cece, we are not boyfriend and girlfriend. This kind of thing can only be done between a boyfriend and girlfriend or husband and wife. Lin Cece's little face was a little pale. After a long time, she asked softly, then, what is our relationship? Guze thought for a moment before saying, I know him. Although the little fool had drunk too much, and although she was stupid, she had a feeling that this was a very strange relationship. Because his attitude was very cold. She didn't understand why he seemed so excited to play an interesting game with her just now, but now he was unwilling. So she bit her lips. Do you hate me? Guze sighed softly. How could that be? Then why won't you let me kiss you? The little fool said very honestly. I just want to kiss you, so I like you. Guze's heart was a little sour. She didn't know what it meant to like someone. But in his heart, he was still a little happy because she liked him. Chapter 30:12. I don't want to. Her voice was soft, and she looked at him carefully. Finally, she told the truth, because I went to Lan Yu's house, the beautiful sister left in anger. Guze was surprised, but he also felt that it was reasonable. If he were Qin Chen, he would also leave. Calmly looking at the little person, he asked seriously, is this the reason why you came to find me? The little fool nodded, yes, that's the main reason. Another reason was that she wanted to eat him. Guze thought about it and felt that he should just treat it as a good deed. Besides, the little fool was quite sad just now, so he just needed to comfort her. After a day or two, he would throw her to Lan Yu and let him solve it himself. Anyway, he brought the little fool back from abroad. Although he liked her, he didn't want to be a nanny. But Guze didn't expect that Lin Cece was like a piece of dog skin plaster. Once stuck, he couldn't take it away. He started the car again and took the little fool to the high-end villa area where he lived. The villa was mainly black and white, and the decoration was very fancy. But the little fool didn't know how to appreciate it. She felt that it was cold and not beautiful at all. But she could also see that it was very expensive. Is this also Lan Yu's house? The little fool asked. Guze thought that this was a project developed by Lan Yu's company, so it could be considered as Lan Yu's house. So he lied with a white lie, yes. He said this to relieve her nervousness, but he didn't expect that the little fool actually nodded understandingly. If it's Lan Yu, then I'll sleep in the master bedroom. After that, she stretched her body and went upstairs. Guze didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Who said she was a little fool? She was very smart. He let her be. At most, she would just soak in his bathtub. He went to the bar and poured himself a glass of wine. Now he could enjoy and relax. Before drinking, he gently swirled the glass and smiled. He was quite satisfied because he brought back a troublemaker. But just as he took a sip, a scream came from upstairs. Guze frowned slightly. He immediately put down his cup and went upstairs. Lin Cece stood in his bedroom and pointed at a fairy on the bed. Who is she? The seductress didn't have anything on her. She just lay naked in the blanket. Guze understood a bit and said helplessly, "Get out." It must have been arranged by his secretary. In the past 2 years, he would occasionally relax, but not often. About once or twice every 6 months. He tried to recall what he had said today that caused the secretary to misunderstand and arrange for this stunner to be with him. Thinking of Lin Cece's reaction, he rubbed his forehead and felt a headache coming on. The beautiful woman was unwilling to give up. She glared at Lin Cece and asked, "Who are you?" The little fool immediately hugged onto Guze's arm. He's my father. Guze was annoyed and amused at the same time. He looked at the person in his arms and then looked at the beautiful woman. He really couldn't raise his interest. Hence, he said coldly, "Get dressed and get out." The beautiful woman was very sad. Then, she glared at Lin Cece and realized that she was missing a finger. She snorted softly. Mr. Gu actually likes a cripple. Guze's face changed completely. He stared at the woman and smiled faintly. "What's your name?" The woman thought that he had changed his mind and hurriedly told him her name. Guze remembered it. He would make sure that she didn't even have the right to be a prostitute. He didn't know why he couldn't tolerate others calling him a little fool. Perhaps it was because she had called him father. Chapter 30:13. After the woman said the name, she thought that this little fool was always messing up her plans. President Gu's secretary had asked her to come. Although it was 100,000 each time, President Gu was such a young and handsome man. Which woman wouldn't want to get involved with him? Even if she couldn't help him, she could open a side business and raise him outside. Then she wouldn't have to work so hard to earn money. Wishful thinking, the woman immediately came down and wanted to pull Lin Cece over. Lin Cece buried her face in Guze's arms and looked at the woman eagerly. Guze said coldly, "Get out." The woman was stunned. She had a bit of a reputation in the industry. Although she was an unlicensed model, she wasn't bad in all aspects. No man had ever seen her naked and had a cold expression on his face. But President Gu had actually treated her so harshly because of a little fool. She was so angry. However, the woman didn't dare to offend Guze, so she put on her clothes and left. When she left, she glared at Lin Cece. The little fool shivered. Will she do something to me? Guze looked at her meaningfully. Probably. The little fool looked at him and said, "Will you protect me?" Guze smiled and patted her head. "That depends on whether you're good or not." The little fool burst into tears. She stared at him for a long time and said, "You're not good. I don't want to like you anymore." Guze's heart softened. He stared at her and said, "Do you like me?" She nodded and said, "Because you took me to eat skewers." Then she hugged his arm and said, "But you don't like me. Look at how you have a vixen on your bed." She let go of him angrily. "Have you ever kissed a vixen?" Hugged. Guze laughed involuntarily and sat on a sofa in front of the French window. It was a very adult topic and he wasn't sure if he wanted to talk to a little fool. Moreover, they had almost lost control of their guns in the car. Guze thought for a while before he slowly said, "I've never done it with her." He admitted that he was avoiding the important points and dwelling on the trivial ones. He wasn't trying to seduce her on purpose, but it was a man's instinct. But at this moment, the little fool was not stupid at all. She looked at him eagerly and asked seriously, "Then tell me, have you ever kissed anyone?" Guze lit a cigarette, and the butt almost burned himself. He quietly looked at the little thing and softly said, "I have. After all, I'm already over 30 years old." If he hadn't done it, then he would be the one with a physiological problem, all right? The reason why he didn't have sex for 8 years was because he fell in love with a girl. Guze's feelings for her were deeply engraved in his heart. Although it was one-sided, he couldn't say that he had completely forgotten it after seeing Qin Mu. He could only say that he had given up. He was a little startled and took a puff of his cigarette. Lin Cece stared at him eagerly for a long time before running over. Then, she threw herself into his arms. Guze's voice was a little hoarse. "What's going on?" Lin Cece shook her head and buried her face in his arms. After a while, she whispered, "Have you ever liked a girl? The kind that you like a lot?" Guze smiled and said, "Yes, she's very good. She must be very smart, right?" The little fool pouted and tears rolled down her cheeks. Guze reached out and touched her head. "Yes. Then she must be very beautiful, right?" The little fool was not going to let him go. Chapter 30:14. The silly girl was stunned. She looked at him for a long time before asking what she wanted to ask the most. "Have you hugged her before?" Her gaze drifted to the bed. "Have you ever rolled around on it?" This time, Guze couldn't help but laugh. "Why do you have so many questions?" However, he still reached out and caressed her little head. "No. She has only liked one man from the beginning. She has never liked me before." He thought that he had the chance before. However, his heart softened. He let her go. There was no point in forcing it. He didn't lose to Zhou Chongguang, but to Qinmu herself. It was Qinmu who couldn't let go, so he lost. While Guze was in a daze, the little fool was once again stunned. "She doesn't like you because you rolled around with someone else." She blinked innocently. Guze couldn't help but laugh. Although he wasn't a very clean man, he was considered a clean man. At least, compared to Zhou Chongguang, he was much more restrained. However, some liking was just liking. It couldn't be changed. He pursed his lips and said calmly, "All right, it's getting late. It's time to sleep." At this moment, he realized something. The silly girl seemed to be very sober. The drunkenness she had shown in the car was most likely an act. Actually, she wasn't silly at all. However, Guze didn't expose her. He wanted to save some face for the silly girl, right? He got up. "Sleep early. I'll go to the guest room. Call me if you need anything." He had only taken 2 steps when she grabbed his hand. He turned back. "What's wrong?" "That vixen slept on this place. I don't want to sleep here," Lin Cece said softly. Guze smiled. "Then I'll sleep here and you can sleep in the guest room." She was still unwilling to let go of his hand. Guze was a little helpless and took 2 steps back. "Cece. Change the bed sheets," she said in a delicate voice. Guze could only give in. "Will you sleep if I change them?" She nodded. Therefore, Guze was like an old maid, changing the bed sheets for her. After changing, she lay on the bed and hummed comfortably. So comfortable. In the summer, she was wearing a skirt again. At this time, the bottom of her skirt was lifted. Guze's whole body suddenly heated up. The fire that hadn't been aroused by the woman's lack of clothes just now suddenly rose. It wouldn't be a good feeling. His Adam's apple bobbed twice, and then he walked out the door. "I'm going to sleep in the guest room." When he returned to the guest room, he immediately took off his shirt and went to take a shower. He needed a cold shower. However, his body that had not been relaxed for a long time was so uncomfortable. How could a cold shower solve it? Outside, thunder had begun to rumble and the wind was howling. A man's groan of pleasure could be heard from the bathroom. Just then, a clap of thunder sounded, followed by a scream, followed by the bathroom door being pulled open. A little person threw herself into his arms. Guze suddenly, there was nothing left. He looked up and closed his eyes slightly. He gritted his teeth and said, "Lin Cece." However, the little fool didn't know what was wrong with him. She kept hugging him, her body trembling. "It's thunder. I'm so scared." He was a man without clothes. Didn't she know how to be scared? Guzé narrowed his eyes and let out a long sigh. You go out first. He had to clean up. However, that little fool had finally hugged him. How could he bear to leave? Besides, she was really scared. Her little body rubbed against him, which aroused Guzé's interest again. He shouted awkwardly, "Leave now if you don't want me to take advantage of you." Chapter 30:15. However, the little fool was still looking at him adorably. She didn't know what it meant to take advantage of him. She just stared at him, curiosity written all over her little face. Guzé's patience came to an end. As a man who had been abstinent for a long time, he wouldn't be human if he could still be a gentleman after being aroused by her again and again tonight. He lowered his head and kissed her little mouth, swallowing her scream. Then, he explained what it meant to be a beast in human clothing. He was such a refined man, but when he did such a thing, he was extremely rough. And there was no technique. Lin Cece's memory was blank regarding the matter of sex. Her back was against the smooth and cold wall, and she was shivering from the cold. At first, she could barely follow his rhythm and kiss him back, but after a while, the skin on her back was almost peeled off. Moreover, it was very cold. Thus, as she shivered and pushed him away, Guzé came back to his senses. He hugged her and kissed her from her beautiful neck to her ears. He said hoarsely, "You don't want to." He leaned against her neck for a while and wanted to leave. But in the next second, he was hugged. The little fool buried her face in his arms and said softly, I want to. She said it was cold, but her body was so hot that it was a fatal temptation for men. Guzé's dark eyes were filled with a storm. He narrowed his eyes and said, "You won't regret it." Because he didn't intend to take responsibility. This night was just an accident. He knew very well that he had no emotional resonance with the little fool, and he didn't have the patience to take care of her for the rest of his life, but he was afraid that she didn't know. Lin Cece's expression was very complicated at that moment. Her eyes were filled with tears as she looked at him. That expression made his heart ache. He almost gave up and wanted to step back and leave her. But the little fool hugged him tightly again. Her voice was very soft. "Guzé, I do." With that, she started crying. Even a little fool knew what the man meant when he asked if she was willing at this time. If he was going to take responsibility, he wouldn't have asked. It was because it was just a night of pleasure that he needed to ask. The little fool was really sad. How could Guzé carry on with her crying in his arms? As he hugged her and coaxed her gently, he couldn't help but start to burn again. Then the hot water was turned on, and she was pressed against the warm wall, allowing him to enjoy himself to the fullest. She was petite but soft. Guzé kissed her and whispered into her ear, "Cece, are you happy?" Lin Cece closed her eyes slightly and said softly, "Happy." His voice trembled with unspeakable joy. That night, she was extremely gentle. She didn't seem like a little fool at all, and the energy that he had accumulated for so long was like a volcano erupting. Because it was a night of pleasure, it seemed especially restrained. After one session, he carried her to the big bed, turned off the light, and made love to her in the moonlight. Their fingers clasped tightly together. He could also feel her missing finger. His heart ached a little, so he became gentler. He called her Cece and kissed her gently, lingering under the moonlight again and again. At that moment, she was complete again. Later on, she kept crying and clamoring for it to end. Chapter 30:16. The little fool hugged him. Perhaps she really liked him, or perhaps she couldn't bear to see him in so much pain, so she didn't make a sound. Seeing her like this made Guze's heart ache even more. After 3 times, he flipped to the side and calmed down, turning his face to look at the little fellow. She had actually fallen asleep, probably because she was too tired. Guze's gaze became a little complicated. He regretted it. Actually, it wasn't a big deal for him to have sex with a woman. Everyone was willing, but when it was Cece, he regretted it. He didn't even know how he was going to face her tomorrow. Guze had never been so timid before. At that time in the bathroom, he had been so impatient. He admitted that he had been impulsive. Guze lay down and closed his eyes. In the end, he still got up to help her clean up. Then, he didn't feel sleepy anymore. He put on a bathrobe and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window to smoke. Late at night, Cece choked and woke up. Opening her tired eyes, she saw Guze's back as he stood by the window. She looked at him quietly. He seemed to be very distressed and in a difficult position. The little fool thought a lot and thought about the woman his secretary had found for him. That kind of woman only needed to be paid, right? She pursed her lips. If that could make him feel better, she would be willing to do it. She laughed softly, walked carefully behind him, and hugged him from behind. Guze, will you give me the money? She said in a low voice, and then raised her eyes to look at him. Guze's body froze. He almost couldn't believe what he had heard. After a moment, he whispered, Cece. The little fool's face was buried in his back, and her voice was very soft. Guze, give me the money, and we'll pretend that today never happened. She walked to his front, lowered her eyes at first, then raised her little face to look at him. She pursed her lips and said softly, I don't want you to be sad and in a difficult position. Guze lowered his eyes, looked at the little fool in front of him, and suddenly hugged her in his arms. He bent down and pressed his face against her neck. He hugged her just like that. She was naked in his arms, and she looked so silly. He felt like he was hugging a baby in his arms. After a long time, he suppressed his voice and said, Cece, let me think about it. Cece looked at him, her eyes sparkling with hope. She liked him, he thought. However, he didn't like her, but he slept with her. He could not give her an immediate answer. She did not want it, but he could not stop thinking. He reached out and gently carried her back to the bed and put her under the quilt. Guze bent his knees and said in a hoarse voice, Are you hungry? I'll go get some food for you. Cece shook her head. I'm not hungry. He smiled faintly and sat beside her, gently coaxing her to sleep. Cece rested her chin on his shoulder and said softly, Guze, don't make things difficult for me, okay? Guze nodded. I'm not making things difficult for you. The little fool lay in his arms and said softly, I only want to be with you. I don't like to face so many people. If Guze had not made up his mind before, he could not avoid it now that she said it. He could not get married, but his wife could not be as pure as Cece. Guze's heart was a little wet. He reached out and stroked her hair, pressing her face into his arms. He said softly, I understand. Chapter 30:17. Early in the morning, Guze was woken up by her shaking him. Guze, I'm hungry. The little fool was sitting on him. She didn't feel that she was as smooth as Eve, and it was early in the morning. Men couldn't stand being teased like this in the morning, let alone when she was rubbing against him like this. Guze closed his eyes slightly. Cece. The little fool lay in his arms and whispered, If you don't cook for me, I'll eat you. She didn't know how provocative these words were for a man. Guzé opened his eyes and said sternly, "Cece, come down." She was still afraid of him. She obediently came down and pouted. "Then you cook for me." Guzé stared at her for a long time. She didn't keep what happened last night in her heart. Sure enough, she wasn't suitable to appear in public. He sat up and wiped his face. After a long time, he said, "Go wash your face. I have something to tell you later." The little fool looked at him eagerly. "Can we eat first?" She touched her belly again. "I'm really hungry. You kept pushing me to come last night." "I said no, but you insisted." "Guzé, aren't you hungry? I saw you sweating a lot." Guzé held back and lifted the quilt. "Let's go downstairs in 10 minutes. The little fool looked at him eagerly. He seemed to be angry, but she didn't know why he was angry. She put on her bathrobe and ran into the bathroom to brush her teeth. She looked at him fawningly as she brushed her teeth. Guzé was annoyed and amused at the same time. He felt warm in his heart. He was wearing good clothes, but he couldn't help but pat her little head. She rubbed against him like a kitten. He smiled and kissed her forehead. "I'll be down in a while." "Ha! Don't sleep in." She looked at him while brushing her teeth. Her eyes were like grapes, very cute. Guzé smiled faintly and walked downstairs. It took him 10 minutes to make breakfast. Lin Cece came down. The only thing on her body was his black shirt. Guzé's eyes darkened. There's nothing in it because I don't have any clothes to wear." She said pitifully, "You'll buy it for me, won't you?" Guzé closed his eyes. "I'll buy it for you later." "I'm going with you," she said matter-of-factly. Guzé's gaze became a little distant as it locked onto her. Lin Cece looked at him eagerly. "Is there a problem?" He closed his eyes slightly. "No." She didn't even ask his decision. She was really stupid, so stupid that he couldn't bear to let her go. He thought that he would call Lanyu and tell him that he wanted to take care of Cece. Cece's health wasn't good, so he set up a sanatorium for her and hired a bunch of people to take care of her. However, at this time, Guzé did not think that what he did was not better than what Lanyu did. On the contrary, he had more emotional attachments, and she would be even more unhappy. He also didn't think that he shouldn't touch her if he didn't want to give up. Because she was a little fool. She didn't understand a lot of things, but he understood everything she didn't understand. Lin Cece ate the breakfast he made contentedly, happily swinging her little feet. She felt extremely happy. Because this was a normal life. She had longed for it for a long time. So she was very happy, and she was with Guzé. She was smiling and wasn't worried at all. Chapter 30:18. He patted her head and said softly, "Eat more if you like it." The silly girl smiled. "Okay." She finished the breakfast he had prepared and even licked a CD. Guzé didn't have any objections to her animal-like lifestyle, but he knew that she couldn't walk in front of people. President Gu didn't think that he would allow her to do this in the future. After licking the CD, the silly girl looked at him and said, "Guzé, what do you want to tell me?" Guzé was deep in thought. She seemed to have forgotten what had happened last night, or perhaps she had automatically filtered it out and pretended to forget. She didn't want to put him in a difficult position. He smiled lightly and said slowly, "I'll call on you and tell him that I'll take care of you." "What do you mean by taking care of me?" The silly girl tilted her head and asked him seriously. Guzé's voice became gentler. "I'll prepare a house for you with professional doctors and nurses." "Is it a nursing home?" Lin Cece asked him softly. But she liked the old nursing home. If that was the case, she would rather stay at the old place. Guzé shook his head. No, it's home, Cece's home. Will you live there? Lin Cece asked softly. Guzé nodded. I'll go over on the weekend. Lin Cece's face suddenly turned red. Will we sleep together? He nodded and said, we'll sleep together. Cece, let's get our marriage certificate. Marriage certificate? She didn't know what marriage certificate was. Lin Cece tilted her head and looked curious. Guzé didn't explain. She wouldn't understand anyway. But he didn't expect that one day, the silly girl would understand. She would know everything. Including him and her, this unreasonable marriage, and his unreasonable arrangement. She would know that his arrangement for her was no different from that of an unmarried woman. And he didn't love her. He just pitied her and liked her a little because they had slept together once. She would know more in the future, but she knew nothing now. She looked at him with sparkling eyes, knowing only that he would live with her and sleep with her. But she didn't know that 2 days a week together would come at the cost of 5 days of waiting. She knew nothing and was being treated unfairly. She happily agreed, changed into one of his tracksuits, and went out shopping with him in the mall. After a while, Guzé's phone rang. It was Lan Yu. He picked it up and seemed to know who Lan Yu was looking for. He said calmly, Cece is with me. Lan Yu stood not far away from them with his phone in hand. Lin Cece's phone had a location, so Lan Yu found her. He looked at Lin Cece's clothes and instantly understood. He walked over quickly and grabbed Guzé's collar. Did you touch her? Guzé didn't deny it. Yes. The veins on Lan Yu's face popped. Without thinking, he punched Guzé's face. What followed was Lan Yu's angry roar. She's already like this and you still treat her like this. What's the difference between you and those beasts? Guzé took a few steps back and finally steadied himself. He wiped the blood from his lips and stared at Lan Yu. I will take responsibility. You can marry her. Lan Yu's eyes were cold, like a father who found out his daughter had slept with someone else. Chapter 30:19. Guzé's voice was firm. I can marry her. Are you crazy? Do you know what this means? It means that Cece will have to face everything again and face those bastards. She's living a good and happy life now, do you know that? Lan Yu untied his tie, looking very annoyed. She's a little bored now, but that's normal. You're just a little feeling when she's bored. Lan Yu looked at Guzé and hit the nail on the head. You know who she used to like. It was Qin Chen. Guzé didn't feel anything in his heart. He looked at Lin Cece, who was hiding at the side. Her expression was very innocent, and she shook her head, meaning that she liked him. But Lan Yu was in a rage. He stared at Guzé. You want her to deal with those social interactions with you. You know that she's as innocent as a child. As Guzé spoke, he grabbed Lin Cece's arm and asked softly, Are you going to be with him or go home with me? Lin Cece looked at him carefully, her expression timid. After a while, she carefully broke away from his hand and lowered her eyes. I want to be with him. Are you crazy? Lan Yu's gaze was cold. It's only been one night, and you've already thought it through. Lin Cece was afraid of him. She was afraid that he would be angry, so she pursed her lips and hugged him. He pushed her away because he was angry at her, but she stuck to him and hugged him again. Lan Yu. I really like him. The little fool looked at him eagerly. I promise, if I'm not happy, I'll come back, okay? There was a hint of warmth in Lan Yu's eyes. He tried his best to suppress himself. What Guzay saw was a good Cici. Although she was a little silly, she was good. Only he had seen her broken state and the most desperate moment of her life. At that time, he had thought that he would protect her for the rest of his life. However, he had never thought that she would fall in love with Guzay. They had seen each other twice, alone together twice. Just together. Together forever. Lan Yu raised her head slightly and said in a low voice, "What if you want to turn back and I don't want you? Are you still going to be with him?" Lin Cici's face was slightly hurt. As far as she was concerned, Lan Yu was her family. Would he be so angry that he didn't want her? She forgot to breathe and just stared at him. After a while, she looked at Guzay pitifully. "Guzay, what about you? Will you abandon me?" "I won't." Guzay smiled. However, he knew very well what kind of desire it was, but Lin Cici did not understand. Lin Cici pursed her lips and looked at Lan Yu. She said carefully, "He said he wouldn't abandon me." Lan Yu's face was ashen. He straightened his body slightly. "One day, you will cry." After that, he turned around. "Guzay, if you dare to bully her, I won't let you off." With that, he left in a straight line. He left just like that. Lin Cici looked at him, hurt on her little face. Guzay reached out and pulled her into his arms. His voice was gentle. "Didn't you want to buy clothes?" But his little fool was no longer in the mood. She cared about Lan Yu. Now that Lan Yu was angry, she was not in the mood at all. It turned out that she also had good and bad moods. Guzay thought to himself. At this time, he did not realize that he had accepted Lin Cici and made such an arrangement because he was lonely. Lan Yu could see it clearly, so he did not agree. But what could he do? Chapter 30-20. After Lan Yu went back, he was depressed for a few days. He felt guilty towards Lin Cici. If he hadn't introduced Guzay to her, Cici might have stayed in that nursing home for the rest of her life. She might have been bored and she might have gotten into trouble from time to time, but she would have been fine for the rest of her life and wouldn't have been hurt again. He received a message from Guzay saying that Lin Cici had been settled down and they had gotten their marriage certificate. Lan Yu sneered, "Marriage certificate? Guzay, getting married is the same as having a mistress. How dare you say that you've gotten your marriage certificate?" But after saying that, he thought of himself and didn't say anything else. After hanging up, he quietly thought about it. He knew that Lin Cici's parents had agreed. Who wouldn't agree? Guzay was rich and good-looking. Anyone would agree if such a man was willing to marry someone like Cici. But Lan Yu didn't think highly of it. He would rather Cici be simple and only know simple things for the rest of her life. He closed his eyes and quietly stayed alone in the darkness. As for his wife in name, he hadn't seen her for a week. He had been delayed because of Cici's matter. Later, probably to vent his anger, he didn't look for her and she didn't come back either. She probably thought that Cici was still living here. He thought that there was really no need to explain. He hated her. He hated a person. He didn't need to explain or coax. The days passed just like that. He didn't know how long it had been. It was probably about a month. He saw Chin Chin. It was in a very famous Western restaurant. He saw her eating with a man. Her expression was indifferent, but the man's eyes were filled with admiration. Kevin, who was next to Lan Yu, looked at the boss's expression and felt a little green. He coughed lightly and said, "Boss, shall we sit there? I've made a reservation." Lan Yu turned sideways and said, "Cancel the dinner with Mr. Zhang and help me arrange another time." Kevin didn't say anything. Lan Yu's gaze was fixed on that table. The man's hand was almost holding Qin Chen's. He sneered, "Just say that my wife is going to have an affair." Kevin held back his laughter. "That's a good enough reason. I think Mr. Zhang will understand and sympathize with us." Lan Yu frowned. "Are you mocking me?" Kevin shrugged. "It's obvious, isn't it?" Lan Yu's face darkened. Kevin said, "I'm not the one who made you a cuckold." However, he did not dare to do too much. He immediately dialed CEO Zhang's number and settled the matter. After hanging up the phone, he saw that his CEO Lan had already walked over and was staring at the man and woman at the opposite table with an unfriendly gaze. Kevin walked over and went to greet Qin Chen. "Madam." Qin Chen was stunned. The person sitting across from her was the CEO of Magnificent Tang Company, who intended to invite her to shoot an urban movie. It was a favor for Sister Quan, and she was still considering it. Inviting her to dinner was just a gesture of goodwill. She had already seen Lan Yu. He was sitting at a table by the side and did not make a sound. Since he didn't come to greet her, she naturally wouldn't look for trouble. After all, they were married in secret. However, she did not expect that Lan Yu's lackey would come to greet her. It was really a headache. She smiled faintly. "Where's your CEO Lan?" Kevin's smile was very official and very meaningful. "CEO Lan is at the table next to Madam." "Madam, didn't you see him?" The corner of Qin Chen's mouth twitched slightly. "I didn't see him." Chapter 30-21. Kevin had never thought that Qin Chen and CEO Lan would be so cold towards each other. And Qin Chen's attitude seemed a little too unruly, right? This green hat was placed on CEO Lan's head, but it didn't mean anything at all. Her face wasn't red, and her heart wasn't racing. Did women nowadays not have any sense of chastity? Kevin saw that she had no intention of joining the table, so he awkwardly sat across from Lan Yu. He was a little embarrassed. He said softly, "CEO Lan, aren't you going to do something about it?" Lan Yu glanced at him indifferently. "What's there to do?" Kevin didn't dare to say anything else. At the other table, the CEO saw that Qin Chen was in a daze, so he smiled faintly. "Miss Qin, let's talk another time. You seem to have some private matters to deal with." Qin Chen wasn't interested in this movie, so he didn't stay. "Okay, I'm sorry." She got up and watched the person leave. After sitting down, she packed her things and prepared to leave, but she had only taken one step when her hand was held. "Kevin, go back first." Lan Yu's voice was a little low. Kevin felt miserable. He couldn't even afford to eat now. He packed his things, wiped his tears and left. And Qin Chen was dragged to sit where Kevin was sitting. Lan Yu's voice was very indifferent. "Eat with me." Qin Chen smiled coldly. "Don't you want your little idiot to accompany you?" Lan Yu looked up at her and didn't say anything. He started eating. Recently, he wasn't in a good mood, so he didn't eat much. He also lost a lot of weight. Qin Chen leaned against the back of the chair and looked at him mockingly. "Why? Are you sad because the little idiot and Guze left? You don't want to eat anymore?" She was as mean as ever, and he was used to it. He wasn't annoyed, and was even in a good mood. After finishing the set meal, he wiped his lips and looked at her. "Even if you knew that Cici and Guze had left, why didn't you come back?" Qin Chen looked a little lazy. "Because I don't like you." Are you going to send me over? After she said that, he smiled. Yeah, he doesn't like me. He got up and said in a quiet voice, move back tonight. I'll wait for you. Qin Chen sneered, looks like President Lon has passed the heartbreak phase. Congratulations. Nothing can change our relationship, Mrs. Lan. He leaned over and whispered, then left first. I still have something to do. I'll be home before 8 in the evening. He was domineering and autocratic. Qin Chen did not even have the chance to resist. Lan Yu went home at 7 in the evening. Unexpectedly, Qin Chen came back. Her car was on the parking lot. Lan Yu closed the car door, and a servant came up to him. Sir, Madam is back. Lan Yu paused and unbuttoned his jacket. What is she doing? Has she had dinner? The servant smiled and said, Madam didn't do anything. She's reading a magazine on the sofa now. Oh yes, Madam said that she wants to eat Sir's cooking, so she didn't have dinner and was waiting for him to cook. Lan Yu looked at the servant's envious expression and found it a little funny. Others didn't know what Qin Chen was thinking, but he knew it clearly. She was using different methods to torture him. He didn't care. He took off his jacket and handed it to the servant, then walked into the hall slowly. Qin Chen was indeed reading a book. When he entered, she just looked up. You're back. I heard that you haven't eaten yet and are waiting for me to cook for you, huh? He bent down and kissed her in front of the servant. It was not a light kiss, but a deep French kiss. Chapter 30-22. Qin Chen didn't struggle as she was kissed, but she glared at him. He was doing it on purpose. Lan Yu had kissed her enough and pressed his forehead against hers. You seem very unhappy, Mrs. Lan. Qin Chen hated it when he called her Mrs. Lan, which sounded like a mockery. She sat up straight and put the magazine aside. I'm hungry. He untied his tie, took it off, and slowly rolled it up in her hand. His voice was indifferent. I'm hungry too, Mrs. Lan, but I want to feed you first. Qin Chen glared at him and was too angry to say anything. He leaned over and kissed her again, looking like he was in a good mood. A moment later, he went to the kitchen in an expensive shirt and trousers to cook for her. His cooking skills were very good. He fried a delicate steak and a few vegetables. Finally, he poured a glass of red wine for her. He leaned over and whispered in her ear, drink a little wine. It will make the unwilling a little more willing. Qin Chen looked up at him and didn't say anything. She was really hungry, too, so she ate slowly and elegantly. Lan Yu sat across from her and watched her eat. Qin Chen looked up. Have you eaten? Yes, I ate with a client. I came home early because I missed home, Lan Yu said calmly as he swirled a glass of red wine. Seeing that she was almost done eating, he got up and said, I'm going to take a shower first. Wait for me in the room. He said it so simply and rudely that the servant's face turned red. Qin Chen was a little annoyed, but there was nothing she could do. He was a bastard. He might really do something to the Rong family, and that wasn't something she could bear. She finished the red wine, and the mellow smell calmed her down a little. At the same time, her body felt a little hot. There was a strange kind of heat. Then she knew that he had added something to the wine to liven things up. Qin Chen was furious. She bit her lip and didn't want the servants to see anything wrong with her, so she slowly went upstairs. She pushed open the door of the master bedroom. Lan Yu was taking a shower, and his clothes were taken off at the end of the bed. She fell down and smelled the masculine scent on his clothes, once again confirming that she had been tricked by him. What was he doing? Was he going to do something perverted just to have sex with him? She was furious, but her body was getting hotter and hotter, and her forehead was sweating. When Lan Yu came out, he saw her like this, lying there with her long hair scattered over her shoulders. Her dress had already been pulled down to her waist. It was very alluring. "Mrs. Lan, is this a surprise for me?" He walked over slowly and reached out to touch her shoulder gently. Qin Chen's voice was low and sharp. "Don't touch me." He leaned over, kissed her overheated lips, turned her over, pressed her against him, and kissed her. As he kissed her, he chuckled softly. "This medicine won't hurt you. It's just to make you more obedient so that you won't be so insincere. You clearly like it very much, but every time we're done, you look like I've raped you." Qin Chen was furious, but her head didn't listen to her. She gritted her teeth and closed her eyes. "If you want to do it, then hurry up. It's not that you can't take it anymore, so you purposely drugged me, right?" "I can't take it anymore." His expression was very ugly. He turned her face and kissed her heavily, his large palm moving down. "See, that's not what your body says." He whispered nastily in her ear. "Your body wants me. Do you feel it?" Qin Chen couldn't take it anymore. She closed her eyes and decided to treat him like a duck. Chapter 30-23. Lan Yu had endured it for almost a month, so he was naturally very passionate. Besides, she drank that thing, so she was very passionate. After their reunion, they also had it, but how could it be as touching as this moment? Water and dew mixed. Lingering and lingering. Until they were exhausted, they hugged each other with sticky bodies. Everything was calm. Lan Yu's fingers ran through Qin Chen's hair, and he asked lazily, "Do you want to take a bath?" Qin Chen lay on his stomach and didn't move. After a while, he said, "Carry me." He put his face in front of her and whispered, "Mrs. Lan didn't like to be so spoiled before, huh? You weren't so despicable before, were you?" Qin Chen raised her eyes and looked at him. "It's very impolite to do this." Lan Yu was not in a hurry to take a bath. He reached out and touched her beautiful lips. "I'm your husband. This is my right." Qin Chen's answer was to gently pat his handsome face twice, neither lightly nor heavily. Then she got out of bed wrapped in the bed sheet. Lan Yu followed her and pressed her against the bathroom wall. He turned on the warm water with one hand and waited for the bathroom to be filled with steam. Then he held her sharp chin. "Qin Chen, don't forget your identity." "I didn't forget. I'm afraid that Mr. Lan forgot." Qin Chen looked up at his eyes and sneered, "Does Mr. Lan still remember the purpose of marrying me? Is it revenge? Then I'm very happy today." "Are you unhappy after hearing that, Mr. Lan?" Qin Chen's expression was a little provocative. "What I hate and despise most is a man who says one thing and means another." Her fingers gently scratched his heart, from bottom to bottom. It was the highest emotion. "You've waited a long time for this night, haven't you?" Her evil fingers were caught by him, and his eyes were a little burning. "Do you know what you're talking about?" She imitated him and leaned close to him. Her voice was very soft. "You know in your heart that you don't hate me as much as you think. You love me, don't you?" Lan Yu's expression turned ugly. He stared at her eyes and coldly smiled. "I thought that after all these years, you have forgotten everything. You don't know the word love." So Mrs. Rome knew about it. "Put away your weird tone." Qin Chen was even colder than him. "My name is Qin Chen. I'm not Mrs. Rome or Mrs. Lan." She was unique. He had her in name and body, but that didn't mean he had her as a person. She was completely free. Qin Chen's eyes were filled with anger. This was because of what he had done tonight. You love me and hate me, but what do you take me for? Qin Chen chuckled softly. I'm just a chicken with extra money. Is that how you see our relationship? Lan Yu said unhappily. Qin Chen pursed his lips. You make me unable to think positively, or perhaps Boss Lan doesn't need me to think positively, but I don't dare to criticize Boss Lan's way. The reason why she was angry was because of Xiao Rongyu. If Xiao Rongyu was at home, would he let Rongyu see her ugly side? This was something that Qin Chen couldn't bear. She wanted respect, not him treating her like a casual woman. After that, she broke away from him and wanted to take a bath by herself. But she was grabbed by Lan Yu. I didn't expect you to be so angry. He said frankly, if you bring Rongyu back, I won't let you drink that. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.